There are some people who move into a quiet place and somehow bring a thunderstorm with them, and in my case, that thunderstorm showed up wearing mirrored sunglasses, driving a pearl-white Escalade, and acting like the gravel under his tires had personally signed itself over to him. I'd lived on my little ranch outside Red Hollow, Idaho for almost 24 years, long enough to know every fence post, every low spot in the pasture, every sound the wind made when it came down off the ridge. And the last thing I ever expected was that a driveway, of all things, would turn into the most expensive lesson my new neighbor ever learned. Looking back now, I can almost laugh about it. Almost. But at the time, there was nothing funny about watching a man bury my waterline under 8 inches of concrete, smirk at me like I was trespassing on my own rights, and tell me, real casual, then take me to court. Oh man, my name is Nathan Cole, and I am not some big cattle baron or land developer. I am just a guy who bought 23 acres back when land was still affordable if you were willing to work 2 jobs and eat a lot of canned soup. I built my barn, 1 wall at a time, raised 2 daughters there, boarded horses for local families, and kept the place alive through drought years, frozen pipes, bad hay seasons, and one extremely dramatic llama named Biscuit who hated everybody except the mail lady. The ranch was not fancy, but it was honest, and the one thing that kept it all running was water. Back in 2001, before half the houses around there even existed, I paid to put in a private water service line that ran from my well connection down toward the county main, and for about 180 feet it crossed the lower corner of the parcel next door. That was not some handshake deal scribbled on a napkin at a diner. It was recorded properly, surveyed properly, written into the deed, plain as daylight, a utility easement giving me full legal access to inspect, repair, and maintain that line whenever I needed to. For more than 2 decades, nobody cared, because normal people did not wake up in the morning looking for ways to fight over buried pipes. I would walk that strip a couple times a year, check markers, trim brush, make sure the ground was not sinking or flooding, then go back to feeding horses and fixing whatever gate had decided to fall apart that week. Then along came Bryce Whitaker. Bryce bought the 18-acre parcel east of me from an older widow named Mrs. Bell, who had owned it forever and never bothered anybody. And right away everybody in town knew he had plans. Big plans. Drossy brochure plans. He was from Phoenix, supposedly made a pile of money flipping vacation rentals, and he wanted to turn that raw piece of pasture into what he kept calling a premier Western lifestyle estate, which is a fancy way of saying he wanted to build a giant house, put up black fencing, stage a few horses in the background, then sell the dream to somebody with more money than sense. The first time I met him, I was out by the easement line with a bundle of orange flags, marking the path before spring runoff, and I heard tires crunching behind me like somebody was trying to make gravel sound expensive. I turned around, and there he was, windows sliding down, cologne somehow arriving before his voice, and he looked at the flags, then looked at me and said, "You mind explaining why you were decorating my land?" I told him my waterline crossed that corner, that the easement had been recorded long before he bought the place, and that I was just marking it so nobody accidentally dug into it. He gave this little laugh, not a real laugh, more like a receipt printing, and said, "I bought this parcel clean, Nathan. Nobody mentioned some secret pipe highway." I said, "It is not secret, Bryce. It is in your title report." He leaned back, still smiling, and said, "My title guy would have flagged anything serious." Now, that was the first warning sign, because a man who calls a legal easement not serious is either confused or dangerous. And Bryce did not strike me as confused. I offered to show him the paperwork, told him I had copies at the house, even said he could call the county recorder if he wanted it straight from them. He waved me off like I was trying to sell him a timeshare. "Listen," he said, "I am improving this land, not preserving your little farm museum. Just keep your flags off my view corridor." View corridor, that is when I knew we were going to have a problem, because nobody who says view corridor while standing in manure country is planning to be reasonable. Still, I tried to be neighborly. I pulled the flags that day, not because he was right, but because I figured maybe once his surveyor explained it to him, he would calm down. And I have always believed you do not start a war on the first conversation unless somebody leaves you no other choice. For a few weeks, nothing happened except a lot of noise from his side of the fence. Trucks came in, brush got cleared, contractors stomped around, and Bryce posted drone footage online talking about restoring heritage land, which was funny because the only thing he had restored so far was his own ego. Then, one Tuesday morning in late May, My tenant Robbie called from the lower barn and said the water pressure was acting weird. Robbie was not a dramatic guy. He could get kicked by a horse and describe it as kind of inconvenient. So when he said something was wrong, I listened. I checked the pump house, checked the valves, checked the filters, checked every exposed section I could get to on my side, and everything looked fine. But the pressure kept sagging, slow and stubborn, like something was squeezing the life out of the line. I walked toward the east corner, and before I even reached the fence, I smelled wet concrete dust and hot asphalt sealer. And then I saw it. Bryce had poured a brand new concrete driveway, wide enough for a small parade, curving across the exact easement corridor, right over the access point to my water line. Not near it, not beside it, directly over it. Fresh broom finish, decorative border, little stone columns going up at the entrance, the whole thing sitting there like a monument to arrogance. For a minute I just stood there with my hands on my hips, staring at it, feeling that deep, cold kind of anger that does not make you yell right away. It makes you quiet. I called Bryce, and to his credit, he picked up on the second ring, sounding cheerful, which somehow made it worse. I said, "Bryce, your driveway is over my water easement." He said, "Good morning to you too." I said, "I am serious. You poured concrete over my service line. I cannot access it now, and I am already losing pressure." There was a pause. Then he said, "My crew saw some old pipe markings. They worked around it." I looked at that slab and almost laughed. Worked around it? "Bryce, you buried it." He sighed, the way people sigh when they want you to feel rude for noticing the damage they caused, and said, "Nathan, I am not redesigning my entrance because of something from 20 years ago." I told him the easement was not from the past. It was active, recorded, and legally binding. And he said, "Maybe on paper." That one landed. Maybe on paper. Like paper was not the thing that separates ownership from trespass, agreements from chaos, rights from whoever has the bigger truck. I said, "You need to stop work and get this fixed before it becomes worse." And that was when his voice changed, just a little sharper, just enough to show me the friendly neighbor act had been optional. He said, "Or what?" I did not answer right away. I could hear a saw whining somewhere behind him, men laughing, machines beeping, my horses shifting in the shade behind me, waiting for water like they always had. I said, "Or I will have to protect my property." Rice chuckled and said, "Then protect it in court, old man." Then he hung up. I stood there for a long time after that, phone still in my hand, staring at the perfect grey curve of that driveway, and I remember thinking how strange it was, how a person could spend hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to make land look beautiful while completely disrespecting the lives already connected to it. That evening, I hauled water until my shoulders burned. Robbie helped me fill troughs under a sky turning purple over the ridge, and neither of us said much, because there are moments when talking only makes the problem feel heavier. Around 9:30, after the horses had settled and the ranch was quiet except for crickets and the pump kicking on weakly in the distance, I pulled out my deed folder from the old metal cabinet in my office. I had not opened that folder in years. It smelled like dust and coffee and old ink. And there it was, the recorded easement, the survey map, the legal description, every line exactly where I remembered it. I ran my finger over the words and felt something inside me settle. Bryce might have had money, machinery, and a driveway pretty enough for a magazine cover, but I had the one thing he had decided not to respect. I had the truth in writing, and by morning, I was going to find someone who knew how to make that matter. The next morning, I called a lawyer named Marla Jensen, and I will tell you right now, Marla was not the kind of attorney who tried to impress you with a fountain pen and a wall full of certificates. She was the kind who answered the phone like she had already had 2 coffees and no patience for nonsense. She had been handling property disputes in that part of Idaho for more than 30 years. Water rights, boundary fights, fence wars, easements, the whole messy buffet of rural conflict. And when I explained what Bryce had done, she got quiet in a way that made me feel better and worse at the same time. Better because she understood immediately. Worse because her silence told me this was not going to be a quick neighborly misunderstanding. She asked me to bring the deed, the survey, the easement language, photos of the driveway, pressure readings if I had them, and every receipt for the water I was hauling in. By noon, I was sitting in her office above a feed store in downtown Red Hollow, a place that smelled like printer paper, leather boots, and old court battles. and she had my documents spread across her desk with a yellow highlighter in one hand and a look on her face like Bryce had personally insulted the entire legal profession. After about 15 minutes, she tapped the page with her fingernail and said, "Nathan, this is not vague. This is not debatable. This is not one of those maybe the fence is 2 feet off kind of fights. You have a recorded utility easement with full access rights." He obstructed it. I asked her what that meant in plain English, because I'm a ranch guy, not a law school guy, and she said, "It means your new neighbor just built a very expensive problem." I remember leaning back in that chair and letting out a breath I did not know I had been holding. For the first time since seeing that concrete, I felt like maybe I was not crazy. Maybe the world had not flipped upside down. Maybe paper still mattered. But Marla was not smiling. She said the urgent issue was water, not pride, not property lines, not Bryce being a peacock with a contracted budget, but water. If the line was pinched or cracked under that slab, every day mattered. And if we waited too long, a repair could turn into a full replacement. She filed for emergency relief that same week. While she did that, life on the ranch got harder in small, mean ways. That is how real trouble usually works. Not one giant explosion, but a dozen little cuts before breakfast. The lower troughs filled too slowly. The boarders started texting me at odd hours. Robbie and I took turns hauling water in a borrowed tank trailer that rattled like it was held together by prayer. And every time I looked toward Bryce's place, I saw his crew planting young trees along that stupid driveway like they were decorating a crime scene. One afternoon, Mrs. Alvarez, who boarded 2 aging mares with me, stood beside the fence with tears in her eyes and said she might have to move them until things stabilized. She was kind about it, almost apologetic, which made it worse. I told her I understood, and I did. But after she left, I sat in the tack room for a while with a halter in my hands, just staring at the dust on the floor, feeling the kind of tired that sleep does not fix. What Bryce did was not just rude. It was not just illegal. It was reaching into the middle of my life and squeezing the thing everything else depended on. A week later, I saw him near the property line, standing with a landscape designer, pointing at the entrance like a king approving a castle gate. I should have kept walking. I know that now. But I went over because sometimes a man needs to hear himself say the truth out loud. Bryce turned before I got close and gave me that polished grin of his. "Nathan," he said. "Come to admire the improvements," I said. "I came to remind you that the concrete is still over my easement." He glanced at the designer, almost amused, like I was part of the local color. "You were really committed to this pipe thing." I said, "It is not a pipe thing. It's a legal access thing." He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound private, but not enough to sound respectful. "You know what your problem is. You have been here too long. Folks like you start thinking history gives you ownership over everybody else's future." That one actually made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because the nerve of it was almost impressive. Here was a man who had owned his land for about 6 minutes, telling me that my recorded rights was sentimental clutter. I said, "Bryce, history is not the issue. The deed is." His smile tightened. "We will see what a judge thinks." And there it was again, that confidence, that belief that court was just another room where money talked louder than facts. So we saw what a judge thought. The emergency hearing happened on a grey Thursday morning, 5 weeks after the driveway was poured, in a county courtroom small enough that you could hear everybody's shoes on the floor. Bryce came in wearing a navy suit and that annoyed rich man expression people get when the world has scheduled them for accountability. His attorney was a young guy named Preston Hale, expensive haircut, smooth voice. Looked like he had practiced appearing reasonable in a mirror. Marla, on the other hand, carried a box of documents and wore the same expression she probably wore when opening a jar nobody else could open. Judge Elaine Porter took the bench, and I knew of her by reputation. Fair, direct, not easily charmed, and, as Marla whispered before we began, she and her husband owned a small hay operation north of town. That did not mean she would automatically side with me, but it meant she understood something Bryce did not. That water on land is not decoration. It is oxygen. Preston went first and did exactly what I expected. He tried to make the whole thing sound theoretical. He said the line was still functioning, that no one had denied me access because no repair had been formally requested before construction, that his client had invested significantly in improving the property, and that if future access became necessary, the parties could explore reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations. I looked down at my hands because I was afraid my face would say something my mouth did not. Then Marla stood up. She did not yell. She did not perform. She just started laying out the facts in the order Bryce had ignored them. Recorded easement, survey map, title notice, marked access corridor, photographs of the slab, county utility records, pressure reports, water hauling receipts, border cancellations, one piece after another, calm as stacking firewood. Then she said, "Your Honor, an easement does not become optional because a driveway looks better without it. My client does not have a decorative privilege. He has a property right." That line seemed to hang in the room for a second. Judge Porter looked at Bryce and asked him directly, Mr. Whitaker, were you aware there was a recorded utility easement across that portion of your property? Bryce shifted, and for the first time since I had met him, he did not look completely certain of himself. He said, "I was aware there was some old language. Yes, but I did not believe it was enforceable in the way Mr. Cole is claiming." The judge looked over her glasses. On what basis? Bryce glanced at Preston, then back at the judge. I was advised that since I owned the land and the pipe was underground, improvements above it could still be reasonable. The courtroom went so quiet I could hear the old clock ticking on the wall. Judge Porter folded her hands and said, "Owning the burden property does not erase a recorded easement. Underground does not mean irrelevant. And reasonable improvements do not include eliminating the easement holder's access." She said it so plainly that even Bryce's ears turned red. Then came the ruling. The easement was valid. The driveway was an unlawful obstruction. Bryce had 21 days to remove the section of concrete covering the access corridor and restore my full maintenance access. If he failed, I would be allowed to arrange removal myself and seek reimbursement. Damages, including lost income, emergency water costs, repair costs, and attorney fees, would remain open for later determination. I felt relief hit me so hard I almost got dizzy. Not happiness, not victory, just relief. Like somebody had finally opened a window in a room I had been trapped in for weeks. Bryce's attorney tried one last little move, suggesting they could install access panels into the driveway, something discreet and functional. He called it. Judge Porter shut that down before he finished. Full access means full access. Counsel, not trap doors in concrete. I will admit, that line stayed with me. Not trap doors in concrete. It sounded like something you would put on a t-shirt if the whole thing had not been costing me a fortune. Outside the courthouse, Bryce walked past me without looking, jaw tight, phone already to his ear. And Marla said, "Now we wait 21 days. But the way she said it told me she did not trust him any more than I did. The first week passed and nothing happened. The second week passed and still nothing. No demolition crew, no permit, no call, no attempt to comply. I kept hauling water, kept saving receipts, kept documenting pressure drops, kept watching the calendar like it owed me money. By day 18, Marla called and said, 'He is not going to do it.' I said, 'I know.' On day 21, the driveway still sat there, smooth and smug under the afternoon sun. That night I walked the ranch alone after feeding, past the barn, past the lower pasture, past the place where my daughters used to race each other on old ponies, and I realized something that changed the way I saw the whole fight. I had spent weeks wishing Bryce would become reasonable, but some people do not become reasonable because reason was never their language. They understand pressure, consequences, paperwork with a judge's signature at the bottom. So the next morning, before sunrise, I drove down to the east corner with Marla beside me, a county water inspector behind us, and a concrete removal crew turning in off the road with their lights blowing through the dust. And as the first saw started up against Bryce Whitaker's perfect driveway, I knew the peaceful part of the story was officially over. The first cut into Bryce Whitaker's driveway sounded meaner than I expected. Not loud exactly, but sharp. The kind of sound that makes every bird in a field lift off at once. And for a few seconds I just stood there in the grey morning light, watching dust curl up from that perfect concrete like the land itself was finally exhaling. The crew had the court order. The county inspector had his clipboard. Marla had her file tucked under one arm. I had a cup of gas station coffee going cold in my hand because apparently even justice starts too early for decent coffee. Nobody was smiling. That mattered to me. This was not revenge, not some old rancher getting even with the fancy new guy. It was simply what happens when a person is given 21 days to obey a judge and decides the calendar does not apply to him. About 40 minutes in, just as the first broken slab section was being lifted out, Bryce came flying down his driveway in a black pickup I had never seen before. Tires spitting gravel, door swinging open before the engine was even off. He got out in workout clothes, hair still wet, face already red, and he shouted, "What the hell is this?" The saw kept running. The crew chief did not even look up, which I will admit was one of the most beautiful acts of professional indifference I have ever witnessed. Bryce marched straight toward me, pointing at the torn concrete, like I had personally taken a bite out of his future. "You are destroying my property," he said. I handed him a copy of the order, folded neatly, because Marla had made me practice not saying anything stupid. "You had 21 days, I told him. He slapped the papers with the back of his hand, but did not take them. "This is not legal." Marla stepped forward, calm as a church bell. "It is, Mr. Whitaker. That is what the judge's signature means." For a second, Bryce looked past us toward the inspector, then the crew, then the open trench forming across his driveway, and I saw the exact moment his confidence started looking for somewhere to hide. Then, because pride is a stubborn little animal, he did what proud people do when the facts corner them. He blamed everybody. He blamed his contractor for not explaining the pipe. He blamed his attorney for bad strategy. He blamed the county for outdated records. He blamed Mrs. Bell, the widow who sold him the land, for not warning him harder, as if recorded documents were supposed to come with a marching band. Finally, he turned back to me and said, "You could have worked with me." That one almost got under my skin. I said, "Bryce, I tried to show you the paperwork before you poured the driveway." He looked away. "You made this personal." I shook my head and said, "No, you did. I just kept receipts." The removal took 2 days, and by the afternoon of the second day, the story changed from obstruction to damage. Once the crew exposed the line, the county inspector crouched down, rushed dirt from the pipe, and called me over. There were 3 stress cracks, one of them ugly enough that even I could see it was not new bad luck. The weight of the slab, the basework, the compaction, all of it had pressed down on that section until the line started failing. We ended up replacing 72 feet of pipe, not just patching it, because the inspector said he would not trust the surrounding section after what it had been through. I remember standing beside that trench, looking at the broken line, and feeling something strange. Not joy, not even satisfaction. Relief, because for weeks Bryce had treated me like I was exaggerating, like I was some cranky neighbor clinging to old paper. And there it was, in the dirt, proof you could hold in your hands. The ranch slowly came back to life after that. Water pressure returned. The lower troughs filled the way they were supposed to. Robbie slapped the side of the tank trailer and said he hoped he never saw that rattling nightmare again. And I told him, if he did, he had permission to set it on fire, which was a joke, mostly. Mrs. Alvarez brought her mares back a month later, carrying homemade tamales and apologizing like she had done something wrong, and I told her the horses had more sense than all the humans involved. For about 3 weeks, I thought maybe Bryce had finally learned enough pain to leave it alone. That was optimistic of me. He sued me. He actually sued me for property damage, claiming I had destroyed a private improvement and diminished the value of his estate entrance. When Marla read the complaint, she laughed so hard she had to take off her glasses. Then she said, "Well, Nathan, some people step on a rake once and learn. Some people build a whole business model around it." The second hearing was shorter, colder, and honestly a little embarrassing to watch. Judge Porter remembered us. Of course she did. And when Bryce's new attorney tried to argue that the removal had been excessive, Marla submitted the inspector's report, the photos, the repair invoices, the original order, the missed compliance deadline, and the documentation of every dollar I had spent keeping animals watered while Bryce played Emperor of Concrete. The judge dismissed Bryce's claim and moved straight into damages: emergency water hauling, pipe replacement, concrete removal, lost boarding income, inspection costs, attorney fees, and a penalty for willful non-compliance. All of it added up to $71,300. Bryce went pale when the number hit the air. I did not cheer. I did not grin. I just sat there thinking how avoidable it all had been. One conversation could have saved him. One moment of humility. One sentence as simple as, "Let me check the records." But men like Bryce do not lose money all at once. They lose it, one refused truth at a time. And because he still had one more truth to refuse, he appealed. 6 months later, the appellate court upheld everything and added $10,150 in costs and fees. Final total, $81,450, over a driveway entrance that was supposed to make his property look more valuable. Within a year, the construction signs came down, a realtor sign went up, and Bryce disappeared from Red Hollow as loudly as he had arrived. Sometimes folks ask me if it felt good, watching him leave. I tell them the truth. It felt peaceful. The kind of peace you get when the water runs clear again, when the horses lower their heads to drink, when the wind moves through the pasture, and nobody is standing at the fence telling you your rights are inconvenient. I never wanted a war with my neighbor. I wanted my waterline left alone. But if there is one thing that Ranch taught me, it is that quiet people are not always weak, and patient people are not always afraid. Sometimes they are just giving you every chance to do the right thing before they let the consequences do the talking. So now, I want to know what you think. If you were in my boots, would you have gone to court the minute the concrete hit the ground? Or would you have tried one more time to reason with Bryce? And if you were the judge, was $81,000 enough for what he did? Or should a man who knowingly blocks another person's water access face something even harsher? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because stories like this always split the room. Some people call it justice. Some call it too much. And some of us just call it what happens when arrogance finally meets paperwork.